And on that note, we're going to open it up to you. So please, I hope you have questions, and there's mics.
My name is Khalid Shami. I'm from New Welcome. How social media platform plays a factor in shaping our narrative right now, and how we are responding right now to social media, how we are prepared to face social media and what's happening in social media in general, especially with the tools, is evolving right now. There are very powerful tools, AI in the picture right now, where they can say anything. There is no regulation, there is no strict regulation with it, and how we can tell this is not the true narrative of actual Canadian, or this is really the actual narrative, what we see in social media. Thank you.
So we all know, if you go on X, formerly Twitter, it's horrible, right? It's a cesspool, it's a disaster, but it's actually much more insidious than that. If you look on WhatsApp, for example, every immigrant community has its WhatsApp forwards and its conversations, but the challenge is the level of misinformation on that app within these cultural communities is enormous. So right now, there's a very terrifying conversation going on within the Muslim community, and particularly with brand new immigrants. Because people who've come in the last few years, because of the pandemic, have not socialized into the community the way they had in the past. They couldn't go to mosque for a while because it was closed, right? They couldn't join cultural groups. So these social media things became the way through which they got the lens on how to understand Canada. And they've been manipulated. So when you see these anti-trans marches, for example, that are theoretically the Muslim community, that's not the Muslim community. Those are Conservative Party organizers working with brand new immigrants and telling them a story about the godless Canada that they have to fight. Whereas in the past, anyone who'd been here for 1, 2, 3 years realized, look, the deal in Canada is leave them alone. And if you leave them alone, they leave you alone. And you can practice your faith and do your work and do whatever you need to do. That is fracturing precisely because the social media connections are taking over from the human connections. And we've got to figure out how to turn that around in a big way. And right now, in this horrifying Israel-Hamas-Palestine conflict, everybody's getting radicalized on every side of the conflict. It used to be you could easily say in Canada, we don't believe in anti-Semitism, we condemn it, we also condemn Islamophobia. And now when politicians say that, they're told that they're weak or they're equivocating and you got to pick a side. And that is precisely because of what is happening in these social media spaces. One of the things I learned as a politician is you got to delve into the muck and you got to be able to use the same tools in the opposite way. But it's hard work. It opens you up to unbelievable abuse. And a lot of people are just abandoning those spaces, which can be very dangerous because there are people in those spaces who have nowhere else to go for community.
I find social media is a difficult space to be in, too, as well, for those reasons. I mean, you don't know who you're interacting with, right? And like on some platforms, I have quite a lot of followers, and I have things that I can turn on so I don't have to see everyone's comments. But then sometimes you see those comments and they're quite harmful. They're quite deadly, right? I mean, some of my Globe columns, we had to actually, I had to ask for the comments to be turned off because they were so hateful and harmful. You would think that everybody in Canada or everyone that read the Globe was a racist. Like, it's just shocking. And these are hard spaces to be in with social media, and I never know what to do with that.
I turned off the reply years ago, but at the same time, you run into the danger, right, of abandoning those spaces to people who increasingly radicalize the folks who are left. So I wish I had an answer. I wish I had a better answer, but somehow we've got to recolonize. How's that for a good word?
It's not good.
Those spaces.
Pick a different one.
Yeah.
That was just for you, Jesse.
Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult. You know, someone who used to have thousands and thousands of followers who did, you know, I thought I did a good job on Twitter. I don't have an account anymore. I think we have to treat the tech companies like the pirates they are. I think they're attempting to recolonize the globe into a global technological oligarchy. because you have to understand that colonialism, one of the key things that it does when it arrives on shores is it disrupts reality. It erodes the reality of the people that are there, and it supplants it with a new reality. That is what's happening with the tech companies. They're trying to distance us from the tangible reality we live in and take us out. And I think it's all for profit, and I think it's all motivated by power and greed. And I think when they came with us with this proposition of like connectivity and all you have to trade is your data, we didn't understand what that meant. And what it meant was the monetization of every human activity, and we cannot have that. Like we can't. Like it's just not a thing that we can exist under. So in terms of solutions, I don't think there's any quick ones. The quickest one I think would be we all divest as quickly as possible from social media spaces. This is maybe why I'm interested in physical spaces where we can gather again as opposed to digital ones, because I think we can get a lot more done face-to-face than we will ever get done on a Zoom, to be honest. And then the other part would be massive investments in education, media literacy, and critical thinking for children in school, because the media landscape that exists now is not the one that we were raised in, not the one that we were media literacy trained for. They are going to have to navigate this new system, because as much as we can all divest, these companies aren't going to go away tomorrow. The best way to counteract conspiracy theories and those sorts of things is an informed public. 100%.
Elamine spoke yesterday about what is in essence the redistribution of culture away from spaces like this to the small jazz bar at Woodbine and Greenwood, run by an Ethiopian family that is inviting jazz. I'm saying right now, maybe these places are done, and those are the places that need to be funded. If we're starting to create this new narrative for ourselves, do we actually need to get away from the celebrating 100 years of Confederation, 150 years of Confederation investment into the small spaces run by racialized and Indigenous folks in communities?
So to me, there's two different things.
Okay.
Am I investing in something called the Confederation Center that advances this sort of notion, or am I investing in a cultural space? What I would say is, let's fund the small thing with the Ethiopian singer, and yes, let's do that. We can also do some of this too, with the idea that maybe the ecosystem is, if that Ethiopian singer wants to one day play this venue, that is what we can also allow.
The thought that newer artists can only exist in newer spaces is in itself a colonial mindset.
Yeah, totally.
Because it basically says, you people stay at Woodbine, we don't want you downtown, or you will never come downtown, or the downtown audiences will never appreciate what you do. So the really hard work of this is, how do we make these spaces for those people? So I used to be the chair of the Arts Commons in Calgary, the biggest cultural hub in that city, and I'm getting involved a little bit with them again. And this is something they're constantly facing. The rent in that building is too expensive for emerging artists, so we got to figure out ways to subsidize them, but then we need to go to people like Jesse and say, give us money so that I can give free rent to these artists. But those people deserve to be in those spaces, and they deserve to be getting to audiences that are different. So I will say about this place, I was in the elevator, and I see that on your season this year, you've got William Prince, you've got Jeremy Dutcher coming, which is great. But how do we create the next Prince and the next Dutcher using these spaces? And I think that's the critical thing to figure out. So my favorite thing in the world is our library in Calgary. The best thing about that library is that it is full of every single kind of person. There is unbelievable amounts of Indigenous people in there, not because it's got beautiful Indigenous placemaking and great Indigenous art, which it does. It's because a lot of them have nowhere else to go. And this is an open public space that's free for anyone to enter and non-judgmental, and you got to check your email. Or you need a place to be warm, right? It's full of vulnerable people. It's full of kids studying. It's full of seniors who still reading books, right? But the real point of it is we built an institution that costs you nothing to go, which is by design built so that everyone is welcome in it. And I think that's how we need to figure out all of our institutions. How do I enjoy the Confederation Center and help you with your bottom line, but not have to pay $100 for a ticket? How do we figure that out? And that's really, I think, the critical piece.
I think that's a big part of the revitalization plan that this forum is part of kicking off, is to create a community hub and space that is accessible the same way the Calgary Public Library is. I'd like to keep moving just so we can get 2 more questions in. Yes.
Hello. My name is Elamine. I'm obsessed with all of you. Really happy to be doing this. Maybe my question has to do with the fact that you guys are sitting below 36 names that communicate a narrative to this country about the story of its founding. And maybe that narrative is falling apart. Maybe we're trying to move away from that story because it's a little too neat. It's a little too digestible as a story of how we were founded. But as we try to move away, Tanya, you mentioned the idea of these superstructures not being particularly welcoming to the people who are trying to move us away from those narratives. So they get into those institutions and then they get burnt out and then they leave because they're so frustrated because of how deeply entrenched things like that, literally etched in stone, are. I think this is a pretty good metaphor, but also, Jesse, earlier you mentioned all the narrative you ever needed was to just look out the window. The idea that look around you and then you will see the shared narrative. The question that's animated a lot of my work is, what do we need to know in common? And then the second part of that question is, what do we need to know in common in order for us to be a we? And I'm trying to figure out what that answer is, and I don't have it, but you guys are way smarter than me, so it's your problem now.
Nicely said. Who's going to take that first?
It's a really hard one. Yeah. I've been staring at these names for the last 2 days as well, too. And I have to say, too, that I am grateful that you are having this conversation and that we're having this conversation now and in this particular space. In our home province of Ontario, we just unveiled a statue of Queen Elizabeth. And we have as well a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald that's in a box right now. We're having this conversation a lot of what does Canada look like, who represents Canada, and what about this space that we're in? No, don't burn it down. We need to have this space. It's built. It's functional.
Made of concrete too. It would be hard to burn down.
It's too hard. Yeah, but we need to, but change it. Change the signage maybe a little bit. Add something. I'm big on adding words. That's sort of my thing. Add another plaque. Add something else to say who is from here. So there's more of a presence when I walk into this space other than seeing these flags, right? The flags from the communities that are here. The incredible Mi'kmaq communities that are here. And it's an easy one. It's so easy to do. And it makes you feel welcome. And what does Canada look like? It is what we've all said too, and it's a collective humanity. And we can't lose that narrative. But we are many stories that got us here. And I think with just a bit of grace and kindness, Canada will keep going forward.
Nicely said. I'd like to offer the last question to somebody who started this whole forum, and that's Janine Wooldridge, whose hand was up and welcomed us to Mi'kma'ki. So Janine, would you give us the last question?
Well, Alan, it's more of an observation than a question. I know that we've been talking a lot about the importance of symbols, and symbols are very much important. And the work that we've done through Olney, in partnership with the province here, of putting traditional Mi'kmaq place names up around in almost 30 communities across PEI, is one way of increasing symbols. But also here at the center, there's a lot that can be done to improve symbols and such, but also its actions and its programming. And I have to share a program that my children are involved in, the Mi'kmaq Heritage Actors. We are in the process of nation rebuilding and getting our culture back. And the Mi'kmaq language is almost extinct. I can only share with you about a handful of fluent Mi'kmaq speakers on the island, which is terrifying. But by Steve and the center providing the space for a troupe of over 20 youth to perform and share our creation story. Every summer, they're here outdoors here at the outdoor amphitheater for 3 weeks. They're sharing with tourists that are coming to PEI in a free outdoor venue. We're moving in the right direction, and I know that there's so much more that can be done, but I really feel that we are moving things forward here. And it takes those people in those decision-making roles to make those good decisions, to be inclusive, and to make sure we're sharing the full story here. So, Walalin.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
Before we fully close out and Naheed heads to the airport, let's wrap up here with any last thoughts on this whole conversation.
I just wanted to say something to what you were mentioning. Two things, actually. Murray Sinclair always says that young people need to ask themselves questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? And where do I belong? And those 4 questions, he once told me, all Anishinaabe children should ask themselves those questions. But I think that all children should ask themselves those questions. When you asked about how do we foster belonging, how do we move forward, and I think anyone can ask themselves those questions when we talk about volunteering, when we talk about giving back and what that looks like. I think that's important to tell our children, to raise our children with those 4 questions so they get a sense of who they are and where they fit. Because we believe as well that life is a circle and a continuum and that everybody has a place and everyone belongs. And so if we miss one, we break, right? So we have to hold them all together. And another thing too is education reform. You know, that's how we change all of these things. All of the provinces have their own way of delivering education. The federal government, under the Indian Act, also delivers education. But far more of our children go to public and Catholic schools than they do First Nations schools. And our children, regardless of where they come from, new people to Canada, people that have been here forever, need to know the truth of how this country was formed. And the truth about all of these things and all of these men behind me, right? And we're not seeing that cohesively. I mean, the provinces have changed curriculum, but it's not enough. And until we make those changes, we will continue to graduate doctors and lawyers and policymakers that know this way of thinking only. And that's only one story out of many.
Any last thoughts?
When I think of the narrative of Canada, I actually think of my great-grandparents, Alex and Maggie Miyawasaki, who grew up in our community. Well, Maggie grew up in Sagamok, which is a very close community. It's also on the North Shore of Lake Huron. And Alex grew up in Ganabajing. And they lived on the land. He was a trapper of beaver and minks who sold to the Hudson's Bay Company, and she was the midwife. And they believed in Canada. Maybe more so than a lot of other Canadians, because they were willing to give so much to that belief. They were willing to send their children to the school that the priests told them to. They were willing to sacrifice all of this. And because they believed they were true Anishinaabe, they didn't understand why we couldn't share all of this abundance. And they saw no reason why we wouldn't. I still believe in that story. And so the work I do is to honor them. It's to make their vision, their story for what this place could become true. That vision still exists. It's not gone away. We can get it back. It's just not this, and that is also okay. And so, I think we can work to make the Canada that they dreamed of. And I think the challenge I would say to Canada is maybe you should think about how to make everything our communities have been through worth it to us. How do you make everything we've been through worth it to us? And if you think about what it would take for what we have done, if it happened to you, to be worth it to you, that might give you a starting point to understand what that actually means. But I think in this moment, the opportunity is great for Canada because the Indigenous people are invested. Like, this is a gift to Canada. That our communities are still here willing to do this shit is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And so I think Canada should take us up. Should take us up on what we're offering, and we can gather again in this room with some different names and some different flags, and it'll be maybe we can speak in a different language, even, the one that the outside world would understand because they heard it for thousands of years. I think that is like, that's what I'm trying to work for, and that's, I think, totally achievable. So that's what I would leave with.
Boom. Yeah, I got it again.
So great.
I'm excited about it. It's Naheed gets the final word, but I'm just going to say we started in a pretty dire space in terms of chaos and divisiveness, and that is all still very real, but there is also so much hope at this end of this conversation, and I hope we all take that away with us.
Yeah, so I love getting the last word.
Yeah.
And I guess I get the last word of the conference. So, you know, one of the things I try to do to keep myself sane in these difficult times, in these times where everything feels broken, I try to live a life of gratitude. And I try to make that a practice, to think about what it is I'm grateful for. So maybe I will end by saying, first of all, I'm so deeply grateful to hear these three people on this stage and to be able to share this space with them and to hear from their wisdom, which is extraordinary. So thank you to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm grateful for all of you. I'm grateful that you've taken the time out of your lives, which are not the lives shared by everyone in this country. There are different kinds of lives. Sometimes they're lives of privilege. Sometimes they're lives of the freedom of time to be able to take 2 days during the week and be here and engage in these conversations. Because that means you haven't given up. And that giving up, to me, is the most dangerous thing that's happening in our community. When people say, I'm tired. Because these last few years have been exhausting. They've been exhausting for every one of us. But we cannot now give up the fight. So I'm grateful that we are continuing to fight this battle, that we're continuing to mold that wet clay, that we're continuing to build the nation and the world that we deserve and that our kids deserve. In the 1 week between the election and the new mayor getting sworn in, I had a surprise ceremony. And the surprise ceremony was that elders from all 7 Treaty 7 nations came together, and they presented me with a headdress, an eagle feather headdress. And it was a very big deal for me. At the end of the ceremony, one of the elders who was there, a man called Reg Croshoe, who I call my Uncle Reg, you know, I said to Uncle Reg, thank you for this honor. You know, I'm going to find a place of honor in my home where I will display this eagle feather headdress. I still haven't done it, by the way. I can't figure out how to display it. But he looked at me and he said, well, you're not meant to display it. You're meant to wear it. And I said, well, like to Superstore? And he said no. But he said anytime that there's a ceremony of any kind, not an Indigenous ceremony, if you're at a graduation, you should wear it. And I said, well, I don't know, I'll think about it. But he said, well, what I need you to remember is that we don't call it a headdress in our culture. Do you know what we call it? And I said, I do know. You call it a war bonnet, but I don't know what that means. And he said, well, this is important for you to understand. We didn't give this to you as a thank you for everything you've done. It's not a Lifetime Achievement Award, right? We give it to warriors. And I said, look at me. Not a warrior. And he said, but you are. You have been and you will continue to be. So the fact that you have this thing means that you have to be a warrior for our people, but you have to be a warrior for all people. And so that, I think, is the message I'd like to leave all of you with today. Mm-hmm. That whether or not you've got the giant eagle feathers on your head, we are all called upon in these difficult times to be warriors. We are all called upon to go to war for that better community that we all need, for that area of reconciliation, for an anti-racist community, for a community of prosperity that is shared, economic justice and environmental justice and all of those things. So I hope that you'll go away with all you've thought about and all you've learned and all you've heard over the course of these last couple of days with that power and that fire of being a warrior. And that's what I'm grateful for. But mostly, I'm grateful for your seva, for all of your service. So thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your
thanks
seva.
to everyone here. Thank you. Thank you, yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for participating and stay, have coffee, keep talking with each other, keep talking with us. And this was the inaugural Charlottetown Forum. Kat.
Fabulous.